Hey people of VC, it's Andy, Cloudy, Milder, your metal mogul. Just a quick intro to this video. Something I've been thinking about doing for quite some time, and I've only just got around to doing it. So I have pulled together every single album that I had in the 1980s. So this is my childhood collection, just albums only. I've shown all my 7 inches, all my 12 inches in other videos, but I've never shown what was my collection during the 1980s in a video before, so I thought it'd be fun to do that. I'm going to switch the angle and just flick through, not cover too many things. There's about 55 or so albums in total. It's a small collection and probably not perfectly formed. So back in the 80s, just by quick introduction, I was a teenager. I didn't have any job or any source of income other than my parents, and the money I had, I did tend to spend on my record collection. But my collection was mostly made up of like dub tapes. So a lot of the really big classic albums that you may expect to see in a collection from the 1980s, I'd copied from somebody else. And I was never going to buy an album that I already had a copy of, because that money could go to a different album, and it did. And so what you're going to see in the next 10 minutes or so is the records that I had in my collection. Now, the boxes that you see them in are not how I store them. They're just for the purpose of this video. And although they are all in sort of polyline sleeves now and plastic jackets, I didn't keep them in, I didn't, let's just say, it's not that I didn't look after them, but it was my music collection. It wasn't something at the time that you really, or certainly from my point of view, I didn't think that this was an investment or these are things to cherish. It was just the music on them was all I was interested in. Having said that, it's all still in pretty good nick, I think you'll find, but anything that you see, blemishes and things on there, are just purely through a teenager handling his records, throwing them on the deck, taking them off, chucking them in the sleeve, maybe even chucking them on the bed or the side or what have you. But if you were around in that time, then you will probably maybe connect with that or think I'm just a complete savage just talking about it. Anyway, let's go on to the show, the main part of the performance tonight, and these are the records I had, all 80s, all original, all still in my collection. Enjoy it. Let me know in the comments what you think, whether you had any of these, or just your thoughts on them. It's always good to talk metal. Thanks for watching. So this is the first box, alphabetical order, AC/DC. Who made who? Adam the Ants, Prince Charming, one of the first music bands that I really ever got into. These guys and Madness. I was all about these before metal came along. When was this? What, 1980? 81 maybe? Yeah, 81. Before I even knew what metal was, Adam the Ants were really important to me. I've got a few Aerosmith albums now. Was never that big on Aerosmith, so my introduction was probably the Permanent Vacation era. But I picked up a few. That's the Greatest Hits. It's got a lot of 70s stuff on it. Gems is another Greatest Hits as well. Rats of the Cellar, Mannequin, Round and Round, things like that. Done with Mirrors, I guess. I think this was classed as their official comeback album. Before Permanent Vacation, which this is probably the first Aerosmith album that I really got familiar with. And then of course Pump, which I didn't connect with as much as Permanent Vacation. Still some great songs on here. Anthrax, Fistful of Metal. State of Euphoria. I've mentioned many times I skipped school and queued at the record shop to make sure I definitely got a copy of this. I was first in line, I was the only one in line, but there we go. I think my sister got me this for Christmas. I would have asked her to. She would never have thought to have got it, so I'm not hiding behind my sister by any means, but I need to listen to this again. It's a classic album these days, but one that I was almost embarrassed to own back in the day for some reason. David Lee Roth, Crazy from the Heat, 4-track EP. Eat and Smile, easily my favourite David Lee Roth. If I only had one thing for David Lee Roth, it would be this album. Loved it to death. Skyscraper, I wasn't that fussed about that one. Very, very disappointed when I heard that one. This is one towards the end of the 90s when I was starting to experiment on things other than metal. This is the DICEMEN. This is about, it's a bit more ska, actually. Not sure what date this originally came out with, but Pop a Pill, really catchy, sort of post-punk, maybe. Politician, Middle of Nowhere, IDR. I had that for years. Dinosaur Jr. So I was big on Dinosaur Jr. in the early 90s. I bought this one simply because it had Freak Scene, one of my favourite songs of all time. So great compilation album that. Elvis Presley. This was my first ever album I ever bought with my own money from the local Spar in Cardiff. And if I ever want to know what the who won the league in 82, I always know it's Aston Villa, Liverpool 78, 77, 78, 81, Nottingham Forest in 79 and 80. Always good to keep a handy reference of football achievements on your albums, especially when you're about 10 years old. Europe, The Final Countdown. I loved The Final Countdown when it came out, the song, but when it became a pop classic, I started to resent it and hate it because everybody liked it and it was supposed to be rock, which was my thing, and nobody else was into rock, and so I hated it when it became really, really popular. Fastway, Trick or Treat. Love this movie. Rented this movie every day on my holidays. Spent all my pocket money on it, which is crazy, really. But fantastic soundtrack. Fastway, Trick or Treat. GNR Lies. This is the one that's got the band in a sleeve. This is original UK pressing. Iron Maiden, Peace of Mind. Gatefold, fantastic album. Got the Trooper, which is still my #1 Maiden song of all time. The first heavy metal album I ever owned, Live After Death. Again, this was a Christmas present that my sister got me. She was, I think she was really embarrassed about having to buy something so hideous. But it was for a lovely brother, so she couldn't really get out of it. But still a favourite album to date, and one of my most treasured possessions out of all the albums I've got. Somewhere in Time was the first Iron Maiden album that I bought when, after it was released. So Trooper was my first Iron Maiden song that I ever got into. But when I was decided, I was a metalhead and I was buying stuff, Somewhere in Time was the first album that came out, and I was really disappointed by it because it wasn't the Maiden I wanted to hear with all the synth guitars and everything. Seventh Son of the Samson. Oh, I love Somewhere in Time now, don't get me wrong. A fantastic album, but at the time it disappointed me. I was a little disappointed with Seventh Son of the Seventh Son as well, and it always strikes me as strange when people say this is their favourite album. Phenomenal album, I'm not going to argue with you about that, but not the best I may never did. Metal Church, The Dark, a little bit of a blind buy. Bought this one after reading an article about it in Metal Hammer magazine in the UK. David Wayne on vocals. I loved this at the time. I can barely listen to this now. It's just too goofy. I like a bit of goofiness, but yeah, I used to be able to quote this. I could probably still quote it all now, but I don't play anymore. Motley Crue. My introduction to Motley Crue was Shout at the Devil. I picked this album up. Loved it, loved the image and what have you. Still a killer album today. In fact, actually, I picked Shout at the Devil up first on, well, I had it on cassette. I taped off somebody, and this was the first Motley Crue album I actually bought, and I was shocked. Boy from Cardiff was shocked to see what the band looks like. But I'd spent my hard-earned money on the album, and I played it to death, and I still love it to this day. Really, really good album. That's box 1. We'll move on to box 2. Moving on to batch 2. Ozzy Osbourne, No Rest for the Wicked. I bought this, I remember buying this from Spillers Record in Cardiff because I really thought I should get into Ozzy Osbourne, but I didn't connect with it at all. It's only in the last 10 years or so that I've really, really started to appreciate this album. It's easily my favourite Ozzy album. Now, Pixies, Trompe le Monde. So this was from the early 90s, probably 91. I was a fan of the Pixies. Pixies obviously very indie, but this is their heaviest album. There's some great songs on here, really worth checking out. Before my metal days, obviously experiment with different types of music. Queen were everything, but Hot Space I never really. I think I tried to get into them at the wrong time, and this just came out, and yeah, let's move on. The Ramones I got into around 1987. This was the first studio album of theirs I bought. It is an 80s reissue, but it's not the first Ramones album I bought, just the first studio album I got from them. Also had Road to Ruin, another 80s reissue. Too Tough to Die was actually the first Ramones album I ever heard, which got me into the Ramones on a school field trip. Somebody stuck on a cassette, and it was Warthog that really grabbed my attention. The classic It's Alive, double live album. I think this was only released in the UK originally. This is an OG. Ramones, End of the Century. The last studio album I had in my original 80s collection. Very different style, Phil Spector, of course. Now, this is the first Ramones album I bought after I'd heard Too Tough to Die on a friend's cassette. I went to the shop and I decided to grab this as a compilation, and it's a fantastic compilation. A little bit strange once you get to know the Ramones, so the track listing just seems a little bit weird compared to some of the other classics, but when you don't know anything about the Ramones, this is a great place to start. And probably one of the last Ramones albums I had in the 80s that I bought, All the Stuff and More, Volume 1. This is a compilation of the first 2 albums, the self-titled and Leave Home, with a number of live tracks on it as well. REM, I dabbled with them a little bit at the end of the, early 90s actually. This is Green. Saxon, I didn't click with this album in the 80s, which is why this is the only Saxon album I have. I actually went out and I bought. I didn't buy anything after. I liked it, but it just didn't. It wasn't Iron Maiden for me. S.O.D, Stormtroopers of Death, Speak English or Die, classic album, recently reissued. I had friends that were more into sort of the punk side, and I remember seeing this cheap. I think I got this. It's amazing that $2.99 springs to mind, which wasn't necessarily that cheap in the 80s, but that's what I picked it up for. This was originally from, well, it's a German pressing. It hasn't got the date on it, but it's a live album, and it's got tracks from 77 and 78, so it's probably an early 80s press. live excerpt. The first album I ever bought as a blind buy, I was about 17. I went to visit my sister who was away at university, had a bit of time to myself, went to a record store, saw this cover and had to grab it, and glad I did. Ultimately it led me to How Will I Laugh Tomorrow, One I Can't Even Smile Today, which is probably one of my top 5 favourite albums of all time. Love it, love it, I love it. I also really like Controlled by Hatred as well. Also, I Feel Like Shit, Deja Vu, Controlled by Hatred, double A-side EP. My introduction to Testament was the Live at Eindhoven EP. 5 tracks: Over the Wall, Burnt Offerings, Do or Die, Apocalyptic City, Reign of Terror, June the 8th, 1987. Live at Eindhoven. Bit of an oddball. They Might Be Giants with Flood. I think this is is this 1990? Yeah, this is 1990. When Birdhouse in Your Soul came out, it was a real earworm, and I loved it. I can't stand that song now, and this album doesn't do anything for me these days, although it might be one of the most valuable albums I have in my collection, according to Discogs. Tony McAlpine, Maximum Security, Shredder Extraordinaire, Van Halen, my only real dabble into Van Halen. Never really been a massive Van Halen fan, so this compilation kind of did it for me. Enjoyed it, but didn't make me want to buy a lot more. And then I have, these are slightly out of order, so I've got some, we're getting right at the end of the, early 80s, me experimenting more in indie rock. Wedding Present bootleg from 1992, live in Brighton. Wedding Present Peel Sessions. Wedding Present Sea Monsters. This is the album that Steve Albini produced for them. Very dark, a lot of kind of noise distortion sound to it. Excellent stuff. And to finish up, a couple of comps. Guitar Wankery at its finest, Guitar Masters, budget price. Marty Friedman, got Racer X, Apocrypha, Vicious Rumours, Jason Becker, Cacophony, Joey Tafola, Dr. Mastermind, Greg Howe as well. I kind of skipped him because I still don't know who he is. There we go. Guitar Masters. And last but not least, the classic Stars on Thrash, low thrash. Price, 56 minutes, 15 bands. And there's your lineup. Flotsam and Jetsam, Mucky Pup, DRI, Pestilence, Toxic, Paradox, Stormtroopers of Death, Acrofet, Gothic Slam, Slayer, Sacred Reich, Snow White, Cat, and Atrophy and Hades. One of the classic thrash metal compilations of all time. There we go. That's my 80s collection that I had on vinyl back in the 80s.